Hey guys, how's it going? This is Khavrion here with another battle report. This is going to be for the narrative event, the team campaign, Operation Rising Sun by Volasi. These team events are super fun. You basically collect with all your buddies and then a bunch of future buddies that you haven't met yet. And everybody strategizes together and we play together and we watch each other's games. And your performance is assessed as a big old team. They are super duper fun. They're also super thematic. There's lots of memes and I've really enjoyed them. This time, I will be with the Combined Army. I am actually the Team Cat Herder for the Combined Army, and I will be playing this event as Onyx Contact Force. One of the things that's cool about the teams is that it encourages practicing together. And this particular battle report is actually for a practice match between me and Gyro, who will also be playing Combined Army, and he's also in the event. I intend also to make future videos on the actual performance of the campaign, but for now, this is just going to be a practice game. For round 1 of the Rising Sun event, we are going to be playing a custom Volasi mission called Neural Net. I've talked about this mission before, and I think it's a very good mission. Basically, there are 9 buttons that you have to press, arranged in the classic 3x3 grid layout. Pushing a button steals it from your opponent, and you can secretly designate one of the 9 buttons to be encrypted, which means that your opponent will not be able to activate it until they've activated every single other button, which in practice means that they won't be able to activate it at all because I've literally never seen all the other buttons pressed. The other thing that makes this interesting is that you get a +3 bonus on the first turn of the game and a -3 penalty on the last turn of the game. So it's really important to decide how you're going to split your orders early in the game between attacking and button pressing. I've played a bunch of games where I'm able to attack really effectively early on, but I don't push enough buttons. And then sometimes my opponent is able to push buttons because they have the +3 bonus, and the game can still be really close. So if you're looking for an example of a mission that is not just an absolute slaughterfest, I really like Neural Net for that purpose. So that's the mission. Let's talk about lists. I don't actually have a picture of my opponent's list. I could probably ask for one, but I don't necessarily want to, tell everybody watching this video what my opponent is going to be running since Gyro and I are on the same team. I mean, it's probably not a big deal, but I also don't have the list. What I do know is that Gyro was running a Sphinx. And the thing about the Sphinx is that it is a very solid attack piece, but it is so expensive that it is also typically the main focus of your attack if you're running one. What that means is that defending against a Sphinx list is basically going to be the same as handling the Sphinx and maybe handling the Taigas that are going to be running alongside it. On the other hand, I will be running a single combat group Onyx Contact Force list called Blender Boys. The name Boys is an homage to the Big Boy list in Steel Phalanx that if you're a friend of the channel, you know I love to run. And like the Big Boy list in Steel Phalanx, this list is composed of some really good, really tough pieces that have high order efficiency because they all get to move together. Before diving too much further, I will say that this list is not the Steel Phalanx Big Boy list. It is not as good. And actually, based on this game and based on previous games that I've played, I'm thinking about switching out this list for a different version of the Blender Boys archetype. All of which is to say, Blender Boys is a work in progress rather than a final product, and this is just one iteration. That having been said, let's dive in. The main fire team of this list is a Harris between a Zeodron, an Umbra Samaritan, and Norkius. These 3 guys can form a Harris, however that Harris is very expensive, so it's pretty hard to run this in addition to a full combat team and then a secondary group. You might be able to do it, but it also is the kind of thing that fits very nicely into the Big Boy archetype. All 3 of these guys are fairly tough. The Zeodron is 3 structure and has bioimmunity, which basically means that it's immune to AP. And both Norkius and the Umbra Samaritan have 1 wound and NWI. They dodge pretty darn well, they have those flash pulses on a high willpower, and they're both crazy deadly in CC. So in some senses, these guys are kind of like the Steel Phalanx guys. We probably could switch out the Zeodron for another variant, but the K1 Marksman Rifle is our primary anti-armor tool, so I may want to leave it there. Next, the Umbra Samaritan is the only actual standard hacker that we have, and the only way to get plasma on the Umbra is by making him the hacker. Last is Norkius. You can make Norkius a killer hacker, and if you just were taking Norkius by himself, you probably would. However, in this list specifically, it's really nice to be able to sling Norkius at things and not have to worry about whether he's in repeater range of something or another, which actually will be particularly relevant in this specific game. That said, you might find that Norkius Killer Hacker is the right profile to run. I may run him as a Killer Hacker later on in this event, who knows. Another comment is that all 3 members of this team have super jump, so you can all super jump together. However, the main most interesting thing about this is all the orders that can get pumped into here. We have the Tactical Awareness Order on the Zeodron, Norkius has NCO, and our Suryat Lieutenant, which I haven't talked about yet, is going to get an additional order. So this team has potentially 3 orders that can get spent on it. And they're all 6'2", which means that if somebody's gunfighting, everybody else gets to move 6 inches. That's really, really nice for someone like Norkius, who doesn't really have a long-range gun and isn't particularly good at shooting with his Breaker Combi Rifle. You can feed the Zeodron orders and have him K1 marksman things, and then drag Norkius up near guys that he wants to eat with his Prothion, and then he can go eat them with Prothion. That kind of efficiency with moving together is exactly what I think you should be using fire teams for in general, and it's definitely one of the major things that this list does. So that's the Harris. Next up is the Suryat Lieutenant. That dude does have +1 order, so 2 orders for Norkius to spend running around. But it's worth noting that he has a heavy machine gun and can be quite useful in his own right. He has a tin bot, which is kind of nice if he's going to get hacked, but he's also veteran, which means that your opponent cannot drop a pitcher near him and then isolate him to put you into loss of lieutenant. They might be able to target him and then drop missiles on his head, but he does have that tin bot, which is kind of nice. So while the Suryat Lieutenant is not really the same thing as Hector in the Steel Phalanx Big Boy list, he fills a similar role by providing lots of orders and being kind of useful as well. Further, he does provide some long-range potential that the Steel Phalanx Big Boy list just doesn't really have. Of course, if we do want to talk about long-range potential, we should talk about the Overdrawn next. The Overdrawn has a hyper-rapid magnetic cannon, so burst 5, AP, damage 16. He's got BS 13, which isn't super great. He's only 6'2", which isn't super fast. But he does have tactical awareness, he still has burst 5, and more importantly, he's only 63 points, which is not very expensive. One other mildly interesting thing is that the Overdrawn has albedo, so if you're up against something like a Kamau sniper, the Overdrawn can just run around and ignore the Kamau sniper. Sure, if you shoot the Kamau will be able to shoot back, but as long as you don't do that, the Overdrawn is going to have a really good time dealing with the other things that are in the field. All that having been said, I am souring on the Overdrawn a little bit. I've played some other games, and I just haven't quite found him to be shooty enough to get the job done. Burst 5 is nice, but he's only BS 13 and he doesn't have any Viz mods. I need this guy to be reliably able to put enemies into the ground. And this guy just can't reliably deal with something like a linked missile launcher or a mimetic linked sniper. It wasn't this game. I had a separate game where he was shooting at a Druze sniper, which has mimetism and was core linked, and the Overdrawn actually died in that gunfight just because he was so not favored to win. I shouldn't have been taking that gunfight, but it does kind of emphasize the fact that if he can't handle that gunfight, then he's not the kind of hammer that I need him to be. So this may be the last battle report in a while that you see with the Overdrawn, which is kind of a shame because his model is absolutely badass. Next to discuss are going to be Bit and Kiss and the T-Drone. Bit and Kiss are probably the most reliable way to get a pitcher into your deployment zone, short of having a fire team. Bit has a pitcher, Kiss has a pitcher +1 burst, and together they can basically burst 3 pitchers as far as they like. Now their ballistic skill isn't that high and they don't have X-visors, so if you shoot too far you may miss, and if you miss, you'll probably run out of pitchers and have to reload. But even so, these guys are absolutely really good at dropping pitchers into your opponent's midst, and they can refill on the Icadron if they do miss, and having landed, the Umbra Samaritan can start spotlighting things, and then the T-Drone can start dropping missiles on their heads. Not only that, but Bit actually has an upgrade Oblivion, so if there's heavy infantry in there, she can start isolating them. Lastly, she is a BTS-6 killer hacking device, so if there is a killer hacker in the midst near where you drop that pitcher, she can probably kill him, and even if she loses the face-to-face, she can probably tank the Trinities. So Bit and Kiss are just really, really, really good. One thing that I've seen Kiss do is just kind of stand there being a disposable Warcore-like thing, and when the opponent moves up, then Kiss can drop a pitcher in ARO to stop whatever's advancing, which I really like. Alternatively, the Adhesive Launcher is also a really good way of stopping an opponent's attack run. So Bit and Kiss are great. Paired with the T-Drone and the Umbra Samaritan Hacker, they're going to be adding some long-range smart missile launcher firepower, which is just not something that the Steel Phalanx Big Boy list has, and it's something that's very good. Last are the 2 Imitrons, nothing special there, and the Icadron. Icadron is probably the best baggage bot in the game. Having 2 flamethrowers is fantastic, having a flash pulse is fantastic, and of course they have baggage. So that is this version of the Blender Boys list. All right, those are the lists. Let's talk about the game. My opponent ended up going first, but I ended up getting to choose deployment. I don't remember what everything is, but the Sphinx was withheld and is right here. Other relevant creatures include, I think this was a hacker, I think this was the engineer, I think this was another shrouded hacker. These 2 are the mentor lieutenant, and this is my opponent's version of Bit and my opponent's version of Kiss, so I guess they're fighting each other or something. There's also like, I don't know, a Taiga over here. Maybe this is another Taiga. Maybe this is a slave drone. I don't remember. Taiga or slave drone. Flash pulse bot and flash pulse bot. This is a T drone, I think. you know, enabling my opponent to drop pitchers on my head and then drop missiles on me. So that's what's out there. Meanwhile, seeing basically everything except the Sphinx, I decided that I was going to castle up in this corner. One of the things I love doing with limited insertion lists is just completely refusing a flank. So during deployment, I had almost nothing that was past this kind of middle line, aside from maybe this Imatron, and then this is the Overdrawn, but I withheld it and counter-deployed specifically for the Sphinx, which was right here. So this little bundle of death that I have circled is going to be really hard for my opponent to get a crack at. One of the things that the Sphinx is vulnerable to is having hacking hit it once it reveals. So I know that by using Bit and Kiss's deployed repeater here, this is my Icadron, which is also a repeater there. I know that the Sphinx is not going to be able to safely reveal in anywhere near over here and anywhere near over here until my hackers have been dealt with. Of course, that's why my opponent put the Sphinx over here. He plans to make an attack run this way, and then once he gets over here, he can start shooting stuff, but that will take extra orders of running, and maybe the Overdrawn can slow him down enough that he won't be able to do much damage. Another thing that was very interesting about this deployment that I did intentionally is that I have the Umbra Samaritan here standing up, Norkius here standing up, and the Zeodron here, I mean, it's tag, it can't go prone. And all three of them have a very narrow line right through here. And I'd like to make the case that this line is using flash pulses almost ideally. My buddy Gyro pointed out to me at one point in time that the ideal range band for a flash pulse is beyond 32 inches. Unless your opponent has a sniper rifle, the flash pulse is going to only be at a -3 at that distance. Meanwhile, any HMG or Spitfire that your opponent has is also going to be penalized. Situations in which everybody has significant penalties are the kind of thing where nothing happens a lot of the time. And if you're using a flash pulse, you're probably the defender, and the defender really likes it when the active player spends orders and nothing happens. On the other hand, stun can severely negatively impact an attack run. If you have to take 2 BTS saves on damage 13, there's a fairly decent chance that you'll fail, even if your BTS is fairly high. And then once stunned, the active player is going to have to use an engineer or doctor to cancel the stun state, which also costs orders. What that means is that flash pulses are not something that an active player can safely ignore. I mean, we all know the story of Hero Warcore that stuns Achilles or the Avatar or whatever and wins the game through that single roll. That's exactly what both Norkius and the Umbra Samaritan are doing with that extremely long line. Further, they both have NWI, so I think it's highly unlikely that anything is actually going to be able to shoot them and kill them. Anyway, for the rest of the deployment, you have Bit, Kiss standing up here, being a Hero Warcore type, Imatron, Suryat Lieutenant, Missilebot, and then the Overdrawn was counter-deployed over here, so the Sphinx has to shoot its way through the 3 wounds of the Overdrawn first. And I didn't take any pictures of it, but pretty much what happens is the Sphinx tries to make an attack run and ends up stalling out on the Overdrawn. First, the Sphinx starts here, runs across in this direction. The Overdrawn, I think, manages to discover it. Once it's discovered, it has to cross this long line, and I take my free flash pulse shots. I think also the Zeodron uses a Blitzen, I don't remember. In any event, my opponent has to make the very risky decision of what to do next. He decides to completely ignore Norkius and the Umbra Samaritan and the Zeodron. They're going to be on something like 4s, because my opponent has Mimetism -6 and bad range for -3. The Sphinx is out of cover. And because there's basically 4 of these extremely low numbers come flying in, there's something like a 30 or 40% chance that the Sphinx is going to get stunned or hit by the Blitzen. There is an engineer nearby, but that's still something that's going to slow the Sphinx down. None of that happens, though, but it is a risk that my opponent had to take, and it would have severely impacted the game had it happened. Instead, my opponent runs the Sphinx up to about here, and then spends like 4 or so orders killing the Overdrawn. And during that time, Kiss manages to get a line of fire, and Kiss manages to drop a repeater right here using his pitcher and ARO. That turns out to be super useful because now I've got a repeater network that makes this area something that the Sphinx doesn't want to get into. So having killed the Overdrawn, but with the repeater there, the Sphinx runs over here and spends some time here, kills this Imatron. I think fails to kill the Imatron, it just tanks everything and then gets into cover or something like that. I think Kiss gets killed, I don't really remember. But the Sphinx is basically running low on orders when it's standing here. And with something like 3 orders left, the Sphinx has not broken the back of this list, and so it needs to get out of there. The Sphinx spends 1 order recamoing, and then spends 1 order running across here. The Zeodron sees the Sphinx and discovers it successfully. It was on like a 4, which is pretty lucky, but remember I got unlucky earlier when I failed to stun it. And so the Sphinx, not being in marker state, ends up running back over here. And this is from the next turn, but the Sphinx is still in the same position. So as we can see, the Sphinx over here has managed to get into a fairly safe position where I won't be able to shoot it, but it is also still, it's not really buried that far in the back of the midfield. And that's sort of where my turn 1 begins. Now, I know that the Sphinx, which, by the way, remember, is standing somewhere over here, is the most dangerous thing to me right now. My opponent hasn't pushed any buttons, but I'm worried that the Sphinx is just going to completely shatter my list, and then he can, spend some time on turn 3 pushing a handful of buttons here and there, and then I'll lose the game. So in my opinion, I need to kill the Sphinx. The way that I accomplish that is basically by taking this Harris and running all the way across the board in order to get Norkius into CC. Initially, that may seem like an impossible proposition to you. At 6'2", Norkius and the rest of the Harris aren't actually that fast in terms of crossing distances. And there are a couple of things in the way that we have to deal with. This is my enemy's Kiss. This is a Flash Pulse bot that is going to be, potentially stunning things. There's another Flash Pulse bot over there. But on the other hand, I've only lost 2 or 3 orders. And I still have 2 orders from the Suryat and 1 order from Tactical Awareness, which means I've got basically 10 or 11 orders or something like that in order to make this run. Moreover, Norkius is super, super, super deadly in close combat. Yes, he has a Vorpal close combat weapon, which is very nice, but he's also got an EM close combat weapon, and if the Sphinx has to get hit by that thing, it's almost certainly going to get disabled and turned off. If Norkius gets 2 orders of being in close combat with the Sphinx, it's highly likely that the Sphinx is dead. Even if Norkius dies in the process, like maybe he runs in, hacks that thing with the EM gun, but then gets flamethrowed by the Sphinx, even if that happens, then the Umbra Samaritan can follow up with its EM close combat weapon or its Vorpal close combat weapon. If I can get to the Sphinx, I think I can kill it. And that is more or less exactly what happens. Harris runs all the way over there, and Norkius manages to get into close combat with the Sphinx. He's powered up because I think there was a Taiga that he ate. He dodges into close combat with the Sphinx in order to avoid, I think maybe getting stunned, I don't really remember. Gets into melee with the Sphinx, and I think he kills the darn thing in a single order. Along the way, we can see that my Zeodron had to have a gunfight with the dumb Flash Pulse bot and got stunned. I think he also tried to take out Kiss and failed. That's not too costly because they're 6'2", so it doesn't cost me that many inches in order for him to take that gunfight. But it did slow me down a little bit. And I actually, as we can see, did have to leave him behind because I just didn't want to bring him further up. And I think maybe the Harris leader had gotten further away. I don't remember exactly what happened, but he did get left behind. Another thing that is worth noting is that this R-drone is a repeater. And Bit is still alive on the table, and also it turns out that that's a hacker, and then there's another hacker over there. So ironically, if Norkius had been a killer hacker under these circumstances, it would have been a lot more dangerous for him rather than providing additional functionality. Instead, all that happens is I think the Shrouded reveal and they end up targeting Norkius or something like that. Because I killed the Sphinx in a single order, I do have 1 order left in which to do something with Norkius. And what I do with that order is I basically yeet him over here to stand right next to the R-drone. He is targeted and my opponent has a T-drone, so if I don't do that, then my opponent is going to be dropping missiles on his head. But because I do that, Norkius is able to be safely ensconced over here and they can't missile strike him. Which is where things end for the turn. Again, I don't really have that many pictures. I find that when the game is hyper stressful, I don't take as many pictures as I might like. But with Norkius stuck over here next to the R-drone, my opponent is thinking that he absolutely has to kill Norkius or else he is going to lose the game. He has a Caliban engineer right there, and the Caliban has a slave drone right there as well. And my opponent is thinking he can run over to me, get the Caliban and the slave drone and the R drone into combat with Norkius. He'll have burst 3, he'll have surprise. Norkius is not getting his +1 burst because of being an ARO, and if all that happens, then he can just explode Norkius in one go, and that'll be great. It turns out, though, that what does happen is that after spending all those orders walking the Caliban over, the Caliban whiffs the roll on the surprise attack, Norkius wins the CC, and the Caliban dies. And at first, my opponent and I were both like, wow, geez, what are the odds of that? But actually, it turns out that the odds are fairly high. Norkius is still on CC of 22, which is fairly good. He'd normally be 25, but there's surprise. Meanwhile, my opponent has burst 3, but he's only CC like 23 or something like that. So the odds of critting are really high for Norkius. Remember too that everybody has a CC skill of 20 or higher, which means that every die is going to pass. So if I roll something like a 14 or 15 or 16, I don't remember exactly what I roll, but it's something like that. If I roll something like that, my opponent, there's a decent chance that he's just going to lose the face-to-face roll conventionally. Further, even if I lose the face-to-face roll, Norkius has been powered up twice. The D-charges aren't necessarily going to kill him. And in fact, having run the numbers, there's something like a 40% chance that Norkius dies under these circumstances, but there's also something like a 16% chance that he kills the Caliban. And then assuming that Norkius doesn't die in that single order, maybe he takes 2 wounds or something like that. Assuming that, then there's something like a 30% chance that Norkius is going to be able to kill the Caliban on future orders, because surprise attack is gone. All of which is to say that, in fact, while I don't really know the full numbers for the whole circumstance, the thing that happened, which is in a single order Norkius kills the Caliban, had about a 16% chance of happening. But it is more like a 30% chance that Norkius was going to win the face-to-face at some point before he dies. It's an interesting bit of math, but it turns out that it might have been safer for the Caliban to spend more orders gunfighting and killing the Samaritan first, and then before doing all that, maybe also pushing a button like this button right here, and then getting into CC with Norkius, because at least if he dies after that, then he's accomplished something along the way. Or maybe Gyro did make the right call. I mean, hindsight's 50-50. It's just super interesting to me that even though Norkius is facing Surprise Attack in Burst 3, the odds of him surviving are really, really high. Like 16% or more. Anyhow, at this point, my opponent does not have that many orders left. What he decides to do is burn through his command tokens so that he can coordinate his specialists into position. I think, I don't think you can see any of them right now, but I think there is a Shrouded Hacker that is going to end up over here. There is a Shrouded Hacker right there that tries to push this button. I think it fails and then runs in here and it ends up succeeding at pushing that button. And then Bit has managed to move forward and get into that position as well. So a little bit of button pressing on his turn too, but not all that much. So this is a better picture. It's at the start of my opponent's turn 2, so it doesn't quite represent exactly what's happening, but I'm going to use it to talk about what I do on my turn 2. I'm in a fairly good position, but I haven't pushed any buttons, and there are some things that are locking me down. This missile launcher bot got stood up at some point along the way, and this flash pulse bot also stood up, and Norkius, who's the only one that can use my NCO, is over here tied up in CC. And his Harris is also pretty darn spread out. The Umbra's over there, and Norkius is over there, and the Zeodron is hiding back there. I've also lost a couple of orders at this point, so, there's still stuff that I'd like to do, but I don't have that many orders in which to do it. I have to be careful. Of course, the most tempting thing at this point would be to just take Norkius and go on a killing spree. Kill the Imatron. Maybe kill the Lieutenant. Kill the Missile Bot at some point. Kill whatever this thing is. But that would leave me with having pressed virtually no buttons going into the third turn, which is just the most important turn of the game, and also the one where it's hardest to push buttons. I'm just thinking that that's just not going to be a wise decision. Instead, what I do is I do have Norkius kill this thing, because why not? But mostly what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Samaritan. It's going to be a real pain to get him across this line, because there is a missile bot that stands up and watching it, but I will get him across this line. I will try to push this button. My opponent has a Shrouded Hacker right there, so I will try to kill the Shrouded Hacker and then try to push the button in the center. I don't have a picture of the aftermath, but more or less this is what is accomplished. The Umbra Samaritan is able to put the Shrouded unconscious, and then he fails to push the button, and I have only one order left at that juncture, so I have to kind of make a decision. Do I push the button, or do I kill the Shrouded Hacker? But Shrouded Hackers have regeneration, so I decide, you know what? I need to do the smart thing, and I decide to kill the Shrouded Hacker. During this process, another thing that happens is the Zeodron who's hidden back there. I actually use the bot that's inside the Zeodron to push a button, and then I run the Zeodron over, I think, over here, and maybe I kill the Taiga. The Taiga got killed at some point, but the Zeodron ends up in a position where he can push buttons with his bot later on. So I also push a few buttons, but I don't really kill all that much. And then we're basically going to fast forward to a picture of the end of the game. This is the only other picture that I have. As we can see, what my opponent basically did, he is completely out of attack pieces, and he is going to take Bit, who was over here somewhere, and Bit runs up here to push that button. There's an M drone that pushed this button. The Shrouded is dead over here. He tries to push this button at some point along the line, but I think it might have been the secret one that I had chosen. I don't exactly remember. But basically, he manages to push this button, and he also sets up a repeater. You can't quite see it right there, which is going to turn out to be annoying, and that is where we leave things. Oh, the only other thing that did happen is that my opponent killed my Umbra Samaritan using the, that repeater that was put there, and the Umbra Samaritan is a hacker, and I think Bit just fried his brain. That brings us to my turn, and this is the aftermath. This is after I've taken my turn. My Zeodron is, I don't know, it was over here somewhere, and I basically have to spend all my orders on the Zeodron. The first thing that I do is I push this button with the bot, and then I run over here and I take a gunfight. I don't exactly remember who I take the gunfight with. It might have been the R drone. But the point of this gunfight is I just want to make sure that I avoid getting stunned. If I knock out the R drone, great, but mostly I don't want to get stunned because I still need to push buttons. There was a repeater here. I used Norkius's NCO orders to shoot the repeater. And then what I do is I actually put my Zeodron right here in this position where it is blocking the line of fire for everyone to see the bot if the bot gets out. I jokingly call this the Panoceania smoke grenade because Pano doesn't have smoke. Neither does Onyx for that matter. But Pano doesn't have smoke, but they can stand behind their own tags. So I put the tag right here, blocking Bit's line of fire. It also happens to be blocking the missile launcher's line of fire, I think, or maybe the missile launcher can't see. I don't really remember. But the Zeodron is standing there. It just jumps wildly in that position. Face to face is the R drone, I think, because that's the only thing that I really care about. Eats a whole bunch of shots. I think the missile launcher crits it, but it survives. And then the bot that's inside the tag is able to get out, and then in the safety of the shadow of the tag spends like a handful of orders pushing that button, and that is where we end it. So throughout the course of this game, I managed to push 4 buttons. My opponent managed to push actually more than 4 buttons, but I stole one, and one of them was blocked. This one was blocked. This one I stole. And what that means is that it is a 5-2 victory for Onyx Contact Force over the Combined Army. This was a practice game. I was trying to get familiar with Neural Net because that's the first mission in the Rising Sun event. I was also trying to build familiarity with this particular limited insertion list. I just don't have the 100 billion reps with this list that I have with the Steel Phalanx list. And so practicing more is going to make me better with it. That said, I also just don't think that this list is as good as the Steel Phalanx Big Boy list. It's a lot of fun. Norkius is incredibly satisfying. The Umbra Samaritan is a great utility piece, and all the tags are great. But the fact that you don't have smoke and the fact that you aren't as robust against the kind of midfield threats that you might run into is a bit problematic. And in fact, there is going to be some revision done to this list. In the aftermath of this particular game, it was discussed how the Overdron really just, was over here, and it just doesn't quite accomplish as much as I'd like it to accomplish. And it's a lot of points and a lot of SWC, and so we were kind of discussing what can we do to change up this list in order to make it better, to cover more of its weaknesses a little bit better, and to make something that is more robust and stronger for the rest of the event. And I think I will talk about that in a future battle report. So for now, what I will say is that the Blender Boys list is very fun to play. It is going to get some variations so that it's going to be different in the future, but it still is fairly robust and it's fairly satisfying, and it scratches a lot of the same itch as the Steel Phalanx Big Boy list. And I think generally limited insertion is quite fun to play. It's very relaxing, and you can focus specifically on using your few really good pieces really well. So if you're interested in seeing how this goes for the rest of the event, then I encourage you to do so. Otherwise, I will see you guys around. Thanks for watching.